The passenger. I am Miguel Reyes, and I haven't driven a night shift in 2 years. This is my first time sharing what happened, the true story of a passenger who entered my car but never truly left. The FBI investigated for 3 months but classified their findings. All I know is that every night since then I hear whispering from my back seat even when I'm alone. It started on a Friday in November 2022. The rain had just stopped, leaving Manhattan streets slick and glistening under the streetlights empty, except for the occasional taxi and delivery truck. I've been driving for Lyft since losing my software engineering job during the pandemic. 13 hours into my shift, my eyes burned from fatigue, but I needed one more fare to hit my target. Student loans and New York rent wait for no man. My phone showed 2:37 a.m. Normal people were asleep. Only the desperate, the drunk, or those with darker purposes roamed at this hour. I fell into the first category. "Just one more ride," I muttered, tapping my wedding band against the steering wheel, a nervous habit I'd developed since Lucia's miscarriage 3 months earlier. Our apartment had become a museum of what might have been. A half-assembled crib still stood in our spare room because neither of us had the heart to dismantle it. Driving had become my escape from the silence between us. I cruised down 2nd Avenue where the buildings loomed like sentinels. My headlights reflected off the wet asphalt, creating the illusion that I was driving through a river of darkness. The radio drifted in and out of static as I passed between high-rises. I switched it off after the third time the signal cut out during a late-night talk show about paranormal experiences. "Not in the mood for ghost stories," I said to my empty car. The irony of that statement haunts me now. My phone pinged with a ride request. Upper East Side, 81st Street. The fare would take me to Brooklyn Heights across the bridge and out of Manhattan. Perfect for my last ride. The app showed a 4.9-star passenger named Thomas. I accepted the request and made a U-turn heading north. As I approached the pickup location, the temperature in my car dropped suddenly. I checked the climate control. I hadn't turned on the AC, and outside it was around 45 degrees. I cranked up the heat, rubbing my arms against the unexpected chill. The address led me to an imposing pre-war building with ornate stonework and gleaming brass fixtures. The kind of place where the monthly maintenance fees probably exceeded my rent. I pulled up to the curb and texted Thomas that I had arrived. While waiting, I felt eyes on me. I glanced up at the building and caught a flicker of movement behind a third-floor window, a pale face quickly retreating from view. Something about that glimpse sent a cold finger tracing down my spine. After 5 minutes, the building's doorman emerged. He wore white gloves and a navy uniform with gold buttons, but his expression was grim, almost apologetic. Behind him walked a tall, gaunt man in an expensive black coat, Thomas, I presumed. In his arms he carried what appeared to be a person. My first thought was that they needed medical help. I jumped out of the car to assist. "Is everything okay? Do we need to go to a hospital?" I asked. The tall man, Thomas, shook his head. "No hospital necessary. This is just Mr. Sullivan. He's my cargo tonight." As Thomas stepped under the streetlight, I realized what he was carrying wasn't a person at all. It was a life-sized doll or mannequin dressed in an old-fashioned three-piece suit. The craftsmanship was extraordinary and disturbing. Its skin wasn't the shiny plastic of store displays, but a matte material with subtle imperfections that mimicked human skin. Its eyes. God, those eyes were made of real glass with tiny red veins painted into the white's pupils that seemed to dilate as they caught the light. "You're the Lyft driver?" Thomas asked, his voice deep and formal. "Yes, I'm Miguel. You're going to Brooklyn Heights." "Correct. My sister is expecting Mr. Sullivan before dawn. It's a family tradition." Thomas shifted the doll in his arms. "Would you mind opening the back door? He needs to sit there." I hesitated, but opened the rear passenger door. Thomas carefully positioned the doll on the seat and fastened the seat belt across its chest. He adjusted its posture, straightened its bow tie, and even smoothed its hair dark with touches of distinguished gray at the temples. "A few ground rules," Thomas said, handing me 2 folded $100 bills. "Don't attempt to converse with Mr. Sullivan. Don't touch Mr. Sullivan. And most importantly, don't leave the vehicle while Mr. Sullivan remains inside. Keep him in sight at all times." "Did you understand?" I stared at the money in my hand. $200 for a simple cross-town trip. I should have asked questions. I should have declined. But all I said was, "Got it. Don't talk to him, don't touch him, don't leave him alone in the car." "Excellent." Thomas nodded solemnly. "My sister will be waiting at the destination to provide an additional gratuity." He turned to the doll. "Goodbye, Mr. Sullivan. I'll see you next month." With that, Thomas closed the door and returned to the building. The doorman gave me one last look, was it pity, before following. I slid back into the driver's seat and checked the rearview mirror. Mr. Sullivan stared straight ahead, his glass eyes reflecting the streetlights, his thin lips fixed in what might have been a smile or a grimace. A strange odor emanated from the back seat, herbs and chemicals like a museum preservation room. "Easiest $200 ever," I whispered to myself, pulling away from the curb. The GPS directed me to take FDR Drive south to the Brooklyn Bridge. Traffic was non-existent at this hour, and I made good time despite the wet roads. I turned on some low-volume music, a jazz playlist that usually helped me stay alert during late shifts. As I drove, I couldn't help stealing glances at my unusual passenger in the rearview mirror. Each time, Mr. Sullivan appeared exactly as he had been placed, motionless, expressionless, just an elaborate doll. Yet something about his presence filled the car with an oppressive energy that made it difficult to breathe. Just a doll, I assured myself. A very expensive, creepy doll that rich people pass around for whatever reason rich people do weird shit. When I reached the on-ramp to the Brooklyn Bridge, my phone lost signal. The screen flickered, then displayed no service where the bar should have been. The music cut out mid-song. "Great," I muttered. The Brooklyn Bridge stretched before me, its Gothic arches illuminated against the night sky. Usually I loved this view, the city lights reflected in the East River, the majestic architecture of the bridge itself. But that night crossing felt like entering a threshold between worlds. The bridge was deserted except for my lone vehicle, and the silence was absolute except for the hum of tires on wet pavement. Halfway across I heard it, a faint creaking sound from the back seat like leather stretching or joints shifting. I adjusted the rearview mirror for a better view. Mr. Sullivan remained seated, but his right arm, which had been positioned neatly on his lap, now extended slightly toward the door, and his head, which had faced forward, was now tilted slightly to the right. "No way," I whispered, my knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "It's just the movement of the car. Basic physics, inertia." But then I remembered Thomas's rules. Don't leave the vehicle while Mr. Sullivan remains inside. Keep him in sight at all times. Why would someone give such instructions for a toy? I realized I had no information about the recipient in the app, just an address. I glanced at my phone, considering canceling the ride and returning to Manhattan. But I'd already gone halfway, and that $200 was still in my pocket. Plus, whatever tip waited at the destination. I really needed that money. "Just freaking yourself out," I mumbled, focusing on driving. But then from the back seat I heard a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. Very faint, barely audible over the road noise, but unmistakably a breath. I immediately muted the music. "Is someone there?" I asked, my voice shaking. No answer. Of course not. I flipped on the interior light for a better view of the back seat. Mr. Sullivan sat there, frozen in his pose. But in the harsh overhead light I noticed details I'd missed before. His skin wasn't just a single flat color, it had subtle wrinkles. Small age spots, even faint blue veins running beneath the surface of his hands. His tie was genuinely knotted, not a molded plastic piece. And those eyes, they weren't staring straight ahead anymore. They were looking directly into mine in the mirror. I jerked in surprise, nearly swerving into the adjacent lane. Heart racing, I turned off the interior light and tried to focus on the road. Just a doll, I told myself. An elaborate, expensive, incredibly realistic doll. Nothing more. For the remaining minutes of the bridge crossing, I forced myself not to look in the rearview mirror. I concentrated on the road, on the exit signs, on anything but the presence in my back seat. I cranked the heat higher because the car seemed to be getting colder despite the functioning heater. As I exited the bridge into Brooklyn, the familiar grid of streets provided some comfort. People lived here. Normal people in brownstones and apartment buildings. The destination was just a few minutes away. My GPS revived as cell service returned, confirming I was headed in the right direction, an address on Ocean Avenue in the Midwood neighborhood. About 15 minutes away. I turned up the music slightly and began tapping the steering wheel to the rhythm. I was more relaxed now. Sure, it was a strange fare, but the money was good. At least Mr. Sullivan wasn't a drunk throwing up in my car or a couple fighting in the back seat. Then I felt it, a cold draft on the back of my neck. I realized the rear right window was down by about 2 inches. I didn't remember it being open, and I was certain it had been closed when Thomas placed Mr. Sullivan in the car. "What the hell?" I murmured, reaching for the window control. But before I could press the button, I realized that window couldn't be controlled from the center console. My Camry was older, and the rear windows had manual cranks, which meant someone had to have physically turned the handle to open that window. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and my heart nearly stopped. Mr. Sullivan had moved, not much, but enough to notice. His right arm, originally placed neatly on his thigh, now extended slightly toward the door. His head, originally facing forward, now tilted toward the window. "No fucking way," I whispered, trying to convince myself it was just the car's motion. Just basic physics, momentum, nothing. But then I recalled Thomas's rules. Don't leave the vehicle while Mr. Sullivan remains inside. Keep him in sight at all times. Why would someone give such rules for an inanimate object? I suddenly realized the ride request hadn't included any information about the recipient, just an address. I glanced at my phone, considering canceling the ride and returning to Manhattan. But I'd already gone more than halfway, and that $200 was still in my pocket, plus the promised tip. "I really needed that money. Just freaking yourself out," I mumbled, focusing on driving. But then, from the back seat, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. Very faint, barely audible over the music, but unmistakably a breath. I turned off the music immediately. "Is someone there?" I asked, my voice trembling. No answer. Of course not. I switched on the interior light to see the back seat better. Mr. Sullivan sat there, fixed in his position. But now, under the car's interior lighting, I noticed details I'd missed before. His skin wasn't just one flat color, it had subtle wrinkles, small age spots, even faint blue veins running beneath the surface of his hands. His tie was actually tied, not a molded plastic piece. And those eyes, they weren't looking straight ahead anymore. They were looking directly into mine in the mirror. I flinched, nearly swerving into the adjacent lane. Heart pounding, I turned off the interior light and concentrated on the road. "Just a doll," I repeated. "A very sophisticated, expensive, creepy-as-hell doll, but still just a doll." For the rest of the drive, I tried not to look in the rear-view mirror. I tried not to think about the creaking sounds, the open window, or that sigh. I just drove, following the GPS instructions, telling myself the ride would soon be over. Finally, I arrived on Ocean Avenue. It was a quiet residential area with classic homes lining the street. At this hour, most houses were dark, with only occasional lights glowing behind curtains. My GPS announced I had reached my destination, and I pulled up in front of a Victorian-style house with a wrought iron fence. Unlike the other homes on the street, this one had all its lights blazing, highlighting its intricate architecture against the night sky. Standing at the gate was a woman holding an umbrella despite the rain having stopped hours ago. She wore a long black dress, her silver hair pulled back tightly. Even from a distance, I could see she had the same sharp features as Thomas. I stopped the car and lowered my window. "Hello, ma'am," I said. "I have a delivery from Thomas." The woman approached, tilting her head to look into the back seat. A slight smile formed on her lips. "Ah, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice warm but with something that made me shiver. "Punctual as always. Did Thomas mention the rules, young man?" "Yes," I replied. "Don't talk to him, don't touch him, don't leave the vehicle while he's in it." "And did you follow them?" she asked, raising one eyebrow exactly as Thomas had done. Yes," I lied, not wanting to admit I'd spoken to the doll. "I see," she responded, her smile widening. "Please exit the vehicle and help me bring Mr. Sullivan inside, won't you?" I nodded, turned off the engine, and stepped out. When I opened the rear door, I hesitated briefly before touching the doll. It looked so real that I almost expected it to be warm to the touch. But when my hand made contact with its sleeve, I realized it was warm. Not human warm, but much warmer than the lifeless plastic I'd expected. "Let me help you," the woman said, placing her umbrella down and approaching. "Be careful with his head." I unbuckled the seat belt and carefully lifted Mr. Sullivan from the car. He was surprisingly heavy as a real person. I could feel a solid structure beneath the clothes. Not a frame or plastic, but something that felt like bones. Together with the woman, I carried Mr. Sullivan to the gate. She unlocked it with an antique key, and we walked up the path to the front door of the Victorian house. "May I ask you something?" I asked as we walked. "What exactly is Mr. Sullivan? I've never seen a doll like this before." The woman laughed softly. "Mr. Sullivan is not a doll, young man. He is a family member, a very old, very precious family member." We climbed the steps and reached the front door. It was a heavy oak door with a stained-glass half-moon window above. The woman opened it and pointed to an armchair by the fireplace in the living room. "Place him there," she instructed. "Gently, please." I complied, setting Mr. Sullivan down as carefully as possible. When I straightened up, I noticed the living room was full of old photographs. Most were family portraits, some appearing decades, even centuries old. And then I realized that in many of the photos was a man who looked exactly like Mr. Sullivan. Same face, same thin smile, same old-fashioned three-piece suit. These photos ranged from sepia-toned daguerreotypes of the 19th century to color photos from the 1970s. "How?" I began. "My family has a tradition," the woman explained, removing a small envelope from her pocket. "Mr. Sullivan circulates among family members on certain days of the year. Tonight was my turn to host him." "But he's not a doll, is he?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "No, not a doll," she admitted, smiling a smile identical to Mr. Sullivan's. "The correct term is mummy, but that's not something a typical Lyft driver would want to hear, is it?" I felt the color drain from my face. "Mummy, you mean that's an actual dead body?" "Mr. Sullivan has been a member of the Thorne family for over 130 years, she said, as if this were perfectly normal. "He established our family's wealth through unorthodox methods, and after his death he continues to protect us." "Protect you how?" "Oh, in many ways. He helps us know who is friend and who is foe, who can be trusted and who cannot." She looked at me intently. "He also lets us know who follows the rules and who does not." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "You spoke to him, didn't you?" she asked, her smile no longer reaching her eyes. "Mr. Sullivan doesn't like when people don't follow the rules." I took a step back. "I don't understand." I think you do," she said, handing me the envelope. "Here's your gratuity. You should leave now, but remember, Mr. Sullivan knows where you live. He has memorized your scent." I took the envelope with shaking hands. "Are you threatening me?" "No, young man. I'm merely offering a warning. Mr. Sullivan values respect and discretion. Don't tell anyone about tonight's encounter and you'll never see him again." She glanced toward the armchair where Mr. Sullivan still sat motionless. "Not many people are so fortunate." I walked toward the door, not daring to look back. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard a creaking sound behind me, as if someone were shifting in the armchair. "Goodbye, Miguel Reyes from Queens," the woman said, her voice containing a strange delight. "Drive safely and don't look back." I rushed out of the house, ran down the path, and jumped into my car. As I started the engine and drove away, I couldn't help but look up at the living room window. Mr. Sullivan was standing there, one hand pressed against the glass. Even at this distance, I could see his glass eyes staring directly at me. I didn't stop driving until I reached my apartment in Queens. I locked all the doors, drew all the curtains, and opened the envelope. Inside were 5 $100 bills and a small note. On it was a message written in an elaborate old-fashioned script. "Sleep well, Miguel. I'll see you in your dreams." That night and every night since I've dreamed of a man in a three-piece suit, standing silently in the corner of my bedroom, moving only when I'm not looking. A week passed after my encounter with Mr. Sullivan. I told no one about that night. Not my wife, not my friends, not even the therapist I started seeing for my sudden insomnia. Who would believe me? A mummified corpse that moves when you're not looking sounds like the plot of a bad horror movie, not something that happens to a rideshare driver in New York City. I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination fatigue-induced hallucinations after a 13-hour shift. The moving arm, the tilting head, the breathing sound, all just tricks of an exhausted mind. The woman's warning was simply a wealthy eccentric's attempt to protect a valuable family heirloom. Nothing supernatural about it. But if that were true, why couldn't I sleep every night since I'd jolt awake at precisely 3:33 a.m., drenched in sweat, convinced someone was standing in the corner of our bedroom? I'd turn on the light to find nothing there but the feeling of being watched, lingered until dawn. And then there were the dreams. Always the same Mr. Sullivan sitting in my back seat, his glass eyes watching me in the rearview mirror, his thin lips moving slightly as if trying to speak. I stopped driving the night shift, claimed I needed to reset my sleep schedule. Lucia was happy to have me home in the evenings, though she noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way I'd flinch at unexpected sounds. "Maybe you should see someone," she suggested one morning, watching me pour my third cup of coffee. "You haven't been the same since—" She didn't finish the sentence, but we both knew what she meant. Since the miscarriage. She thought my behavior was delayed grief, and I let her believe that. It was easier than the truth. 7 days after my encounter with the Thorns, I received a text from an unknown number. "He misses you, driver. He asks for you in the night." I blocked the number immediately, hands shaking so badly I dropped my phone twice. I told myself it was just a wrong number or a prank. But deep down, I knew better. That evening, I was alone in our apartment. Lucia had gone to visit her sister in New Jersey, an overnight trip I'd encouraged, thinking some time alone might help me sort through whatever was happening to me. I'd been sitting on the couch, half watching a basketball game on TV, when I heard it, a soft creaking sound from our bedroom, like weight shifting on floorboards. Our cat, Luna, had been sleeping beside me. At the sound, her head jerked up, ears flattened against her skull. She stared toward the hallway, hackles rising. "It's nothing," I told her, trying to convince myself as much as the cat. "Old building, pipes settling." Luna wasn't persuaded. She leapt from the couch and disappeared under the coffee table, eyes still fixed on the hallway. I muted the TV. The apartment fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. I strained to listen, telling myself there was nothing to hear. Then it came again, creak, 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 like slow footsteps moving from the bedroom toward the living room. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding pathetically thin even to my own ears. No answer. Just another creak closer now. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, when the screen suddenly went black. I tried the power button, nothing. Dead, despite being at 87% battery just minutes earlier. The TV flickered its screen, filling with static before going dark as well. The lamp beside me dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again, as if breathing. "This isn't happening," I whispered, rising from the couch. "This is not fucking happening." I backed toward the front door, eyes fixed on the hallway entrance. The temperature in the apartment dropped so rapidly I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The cold burned my lungs sharp and unnatural. In the shadows of the hallway, something moved. Not a person, a suggestion of a person. A darkness deeper than the surrounding shadows, roughly man-shaped with two pale gleams where eyes might be. "What do you want?" I demanded, fumbling behind me for the doorknob. The shadow paused, the pale gleams fixed on me unblinking. "To finish our conversation, Miguel?" The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't even particularly frightening, a cultured elderly man's voice with a hint of an accent I couldn't place. What terrified me was that it seemed to come from inside my own head rather than from the shadow in the hallway. I yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway, not stopping until I reached the stairwell. I took the stairs two at a time, bursting into the lobby and past the startled doorman. Outside, the November air felt warm compared to the unnatural cold of my apartment. I walked for hours that night, keeping to well-lit streets, trying to make sense of what was happening. By dawn, exhaustion overtook fear, and I returned home half expecting to find the apartment in disarray. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No shadow in the hallway, no supernatural cold. Luna emerged from under the coffee table and wound around my ankles as if nothing had happened. My phone powered on normally, showing dozens of missed calls from Lucia, worried when I hadn't responded to her texts. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But when I went to make the bed, I found something on my pillow, a small yellowed card with faded handwriting. The passenger decides the destination, not the driver. I burned the card in the kitchen sink, watching it curl and blacken. I told myself that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I was back driving for Lyft, day shifts only. I needed the money, and more importantly, I needed normalcy, routine, something to convince me I wasn't losing my mind. It was mid-afternoon when I picked up a fare from Columbia University. The passenger, a middle-aged professor type with elbow-patched tweed and wire-rimmed glasses, slid into my back seat with a heavy leather briefcase. "Metropolitan Museum, please," he said, already engrossed in the papers he'd extracted from his briefcase. I nodded and pulled away from the curb, grateful for a quiet passenger. The professor didn't seem interested in small talk, which suited me fine. My mind was elsewhere, still trying to process the events of the past 10 days. We were crossing Central Park when my radio suddenly switched stations on its own, settling on a frequency of static and half-heard whispers. "Sorry about that," I said, reaching to change it back. "About what?" the professor asked, looking up from his papers. "The radio. I stopped. The radio wasn't on. The whispers I'd heard were coming from somewhere else." "Never mind," I said, gripping the wheel tighter. The professor returned to his papers, but I could feel him watching me in the rearview mirror. Something about his gaze felt wrong. Too intent, too familiar. Traffic slowed to a crawl near the museum, caught in the usual midtown congestion. As we sat waiting for the light to change, I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The professor was still there, but something had changed. His face seemed different, the angles sharper, the skin waxy. His eyes, previously a nondescript brown, now had a glassy quality that reflected the light unnaturally. I blinked hard, and the professor's face was normal again. Just my imagination. It had to be. When we finally reached the museum, the professor gathered his papers, paid through the app, and exited the vehicle. As he walked away, he turned back briefly. "We'll continue our conversation soon, Miguel," he said with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. I hadn't told him my name. Lyft shows passengers only your first initial, never your full name. I watched him ascend the museum steps, my heart hammering. Before he disappeared inside, he turned once more, and I swear his face flickered just for an instant into the waxy, glass-eyed visage of Mr. Sullivan. That night I decided to research the Thorne family. If they were as wealthy and established as they seemed, there should be information about them online. I started with basic searches: Thorne family, New York, Sullivan Thorne Mummy, Thorne Family Tradition, Brooklyn. Most results were useless businesses, unrelated people, real estate listings. But one link caught my attention, an archived newspaper article from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle dated 1889. It mentioned a Sullivan A. Thorne described as a scholar and explorer of note who had recently returned from an extended journey to China. The article stated he had brought back archaeological artifacts and invaluable manuscripts, and would soon be giving a presentation at the Brooklyn Archaeological Society. I searched for follow-up articles about this presentation and found a brief mention Thorne had shared his findings on the preservation techniques of China's first emperor Qin Shi Huang. He spoke about discovering an ancient manuscript describing a special preservation process that the emperor's sorcerers had used not just to preserve the emperor's body, but to bind his soul to the mortal realm. Further searching revealed Thorne died in 1896, allegedly from a stroke. His body was never buried. The funeral had been postponed indefinitely at the family's request due to special cultural customs Thorne had specified in his will. A chill ran through me as pieces began falling into place. Sullivan A. Thorne discovers an ancient Chinese preservation ritual, dies suddenly, no funeral. And a century later, his mummified body is being passed between family members who speak of him as if he's still alive somehow. I was so absorbed in my research I didn't notice the time until my laptop screen suddenly went black. Power outage, no. The lamp beside me was still on. I pressed the power button, but nothing happened. The screen remained dark except for a faint reflection of the room behind me. In that reflection, I saw a figure standing behind my chair. I spun around. Nothing there. When I turned back to my laptop, the screen had come back on, but instead of my search results, it displayed a single sentence. Curiosity is an admirable trait, Miguel. It is also dangerous. The words faded, replaced by a browser window showing an obituary from 1973. The deceased was a taxi driver named Ernesto Vasquez, found dead in his cab near the Brooklyn waterfront. The cause of death was listed as unknown, but the article mentioned unusual preservation of the body despite being discovered 3 days after estimated time of death. A handwritten note had been scanned alongside the obituary, Sullivan's newest assistant. Arrangements had been made for the head. The screen went black again, then returned to my original search results as if nothing had happened. I slammed the laptop shut, grabbed my keys, and left the apartment. I needed air. I needed to think. Most of all, I needed to not be alone with my thoughts and whatever was manipulating my technology. I walked to a nearby 24-hour diner, ordered coffee, and tried to make sense of what I'd found. Sullivan Thorne had discovered some ancient Chinese preservation ritual that supposedly bound the soul to the body after death. Now, over a century later, his mummified corpse was being circulated among family members. And somehow he was aware, active, able to communicate, and he had targeted other drivers before. My phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number as before. The ritual requires a new vessel every century. You have been chosen driver. This time I didn't block the number. I replied, "What do you want from me?" The response came seconds later, what every passenger wants, a destination. I didn't tell Lucia why I insisted we stay at her sister's place that night. I made excuses our apartment's heating was malfunctioning. I'd seen a mouse, the neighbors were too loud. She knew I was lying but didn't press the issue. The strain between us, present since the miscarriage, had only deepened with my recent behavior. That night, lying on the pull-out couch while Lucia slept in the guest room, I finally managed to drift off around 2 a.m. The dream came immediately. I was driving my car along a road I didn't recognize. It was night and fog pressed against the windows, limiting visibility to a few feet ahead. The headlights seemed to illuminate nothing but more fog. Mr. Sullivan sat in the back seat, more animated than I'd seen him before. His glass eyes blinked occasionally, and his waxy fingers tapped a rhythm on his knee. "Where are we going?" I asked, meeting his gaze in the rearview mirror. "Where all journeys end eventually," he replied, his thin lips barely moving. "But we have time for a chat first. What are you?" I demanded. Sullivan smiled, a horrible stretching of his mummified face. "I am a traveler just like you, or perhaps more accurately, a tourist in the land of the living. You're dead. You died in 1896. Death is merely a transition, Miguel. I found a way to postpone the journey, to remain in the in-between, neither fully here nor fully gone. In the dream, I pulled the car to the side of the road. The fog pressed against the windows, isolating us in a small bubble of clarity. 'Why me?' I asked. 'What do you want from me?' 'I need what every traveler needs eventually,' Sullivan said, leaning forward. I could smell him now, herbs and chemicals and something underneath ancient and rotting. A new conveyance, a new vessel. His cold, dry hand touched my shoulder. Even through my shirt, his touch burned like ice. 'My current form is failing. The preservation techniques I discovered in China are remarkable but not perfect. After 130 years, the materials degrade, the connection weakens.' 'So what you want my body?' I asked, revulsion mixing with fear. Sullivan's laugh was like paper tearing. 'Not your body, Miguel, your service, your assistance in the ritual. The thorns have served me well, but they lack certain qualities that you possess.' 'What qualities?' 'Perception. You saw me for what I am immediately. Most dismiss the evidence of their senses, rationalize away the impossible. But not you.' His glass eyes gleamed in the darkness. 'You have the sight, and I need someone who can see.' Before I could ask what he meant, the car suddenly filled with a thick, choking fog. It poured in through the vents, the seams of the doors, the crack in the window. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see. I felt Sullivan's hands on my throat, not strangling but probing as if searching for something. 'Soon,' he whispered, his voice right against my ear now. 'Soon you'll understand your role in all this. The passenger and the driver, the vessel and the conduit.' I woke with a strangled gasp, sitting bolt upright on the pull-out couch. The room was dark except for the green glow of the microwave clock, 3:33 a.m. Something crinkled in my hand. I fumbled for the lamp and turned it on, then looked down at what I was holding. It was a yellowed piece of parchment covered in Chinese characters and diagrams of the human body. At the bottom in English was a notation, "The Binding Ritual of Qin," translated by S.A. Thorne, 1889. I had never sleepwalked before, never taken objects without remembering. This paper couldn't possibly be in my hand yet. There it was, ancient and real, its edges crumbling slightly where my fingers gripped too tightly. I studied the diagrams more closely. They showed a mummified body lines of energy connecting it to living people arranged in a circle. One figure stood apart, marked with a symbol over the heart. Notes in the margin, written in faded ink. The conduit must be willing. The conduit must have the sight. The conduit opens the way for transfer. This was impossible. I was still dreaming, had to be. I pinched myself hard, feeling the sharp pain. Not a dream. I flipped the parchment over. On the back was a handwritten note in the same elegant script I'd seen before. "I've left this for you to find, Miguel. Your curiosity deserves to be rewarded. If you want answers, come to the Brooklyn address. Sophia will be waiting. She has questions of her own, but come alone, the others wouldn't understand your importance." Sophia. That must be the woman who had received Sullivan Thomas's sister. Was she offering help, or was this another trap? I folded the parchment carefully and tucked it into my wallet. Whatever was happening, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Sullivan wasn't going to leave me alone, and these dreams and visitations would continue until I confronted the situation. I would go to Brooklyn, but not unarmed with knowledge. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to know more about this binding ritual of Qin and what it meant to be a conduit. The New York Public Library opened at 10 a.m. I was waiting outside when the doors unlocked, having told Lucia I had an early Lyft shift. Inside, I found a quiet corner and began researching ancient Chinese preservation techniques, Emperor Qin Shi Huang, and anything related to binding souls to bodies. Most resources discuss Qin's famous terracotta army and his obsession with immortality. He reportedly consumed mercury pills believing they would grant eternal life. Ironically, they probably killed him. But nothing mentioned the ritual described in the parchment. After hours of fruitless research, I approached a librarian who specialized in Asian history. I showed her a photo of the parchment on my phone, careful to crop out the English notes. She studied it with academic interest. This appears to be a Taoist longevity ritual, but it's unlike any I've seen documented. Where did you find this? Family heirloom, I lied. My great-grandfather was an explorer. Fascinating. The symbols here refer to Hun and Po, two types of soul in Chinese belief. Hun is the higher ethereal soul that leaves the body after death. Po is the physical soul that remains with the corpse. And this ritual, what's it for? She frowned slightly. Based on these diagrams, it appears to be a method for keeping the Hun from departing, binding it to the Po and the physical body after death. But this would be considered highly unorthodox, even heretical in traditional Taoism. The natural order requires the Hun to eventually depart. What happens if the Hun is forced to stay? According to traditional belief, it would result in a hungry ghost, a being caught between worlds, unable to move on, potentially malevolent. She handed back my phone. But these are just ancient superstitions, of course. Not superstitions, reality. A reality I was living. One more question, I said. What's the symbol here over this figure's heart? I pointed to the marked figure standing apart from the circle. She leaned closer. That's Men Gate, or doorway. This figure is depicted as a threshold or passage. She looked up at me curiously. Are you researching for a book? Something like that, I muttered, thanking her before walking away. A threshold, a passage. The conduit opens the way for transfer. Sullivan needed me as a doorway, but for what? To move his soul into a new body, or something worse? As I left the library, my phone pinged with a new text. Time grows short, Miguel. Decisions must be made. The ritual approaches. It was 3:33 p.m. I decided to go to Brooklyn that evening. I needed answers, and Sophia Thorne, if she was indeed the author of the note, seemed willing to provide them. I told Lucia I had a late shift and wouldn't be home until after midnight. Another lie to add to the growing collection. The subway ride to Brooklyn felt surreal. Fellow passengers appeared normal enough, commuters, returning home couples, headed out for dinner, students with headphones. None of them knew that sitting among them was a man being haunted by a mummified corpse, carrying an ancient ritual parchment in his wallet. The mundanity of the scene made everything else seem even more insane. I arrived at Ocean Avenue just after 8 p.m. The Victorian house looked different in the evening light, less imposing, more neglected. Paint peeled from the ornate trim, and some of the stained glass windows appeared cracked. The front yard, which I hadn't paid much attention to during my night visit, was overgrown with weeds and dead plants. I hesitated at the gate, suddenly unsure. What if this was a trap? What if the whole family was in on it, using me for some terrible purpose? But I'd come too far to turn back now. I needed to know what was happening to me. I pushed open the gate, which creaked ominously, and walked up the path to the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open. The woman who stood there was not the silver-haired matron who had greeted me a week ago. This woman was younger, early 30s, perhaps, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore modern clothes, black jeans, and a gray sweater, a stark contrast to the Victorian surroundings. "Miguel Reyes," she said, not a question. "I've been expecting you. I'm Sophia Thorne." "You sent me this," I said, taking out the parchment. She glanced at it and nodded. "Actually, Sullivan sent it to you. I merely facilitated. Please come in. We have much to discuss." I followed her into the house, noticing immediately that it looked different inside as well. The furniture was dusty, some covered with sheets. The photographs I'd seen on the walls were fewer, and many frames stood empty. "Where's Sullivan?" I asked, glancing around nervously. "Not here," Sophia said, leading me to what appeared to be a study. "Not yet. He's with Thomas for another 2 weeks before the transfer." "Transfer?" She gestured for me to sit in a leather armchair while she poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "That's what we need to discuss. Sullivan has chosen you for a role in the upcoming ritual. I need to know if you understand what that means." I accepted the drink, but didn't sip it. "I don't understand any of this. A week ago I was just a Lyft driver trying to make rent. Now I'm being stalked by a 130-year-old mummified corpse that can somehow move and speak and enter my dreams." Sophia's expression remained impassive. "Sullivan has that effect on people. He disrupts their comfortable realities." She sat across from me. "What has he told you so far?" I recounted my dreams, the visitations, the cryptic messages. As I spoke, Sophia's face grew increasingly troubled. "He's moving quickly this time," she murmured when I finished. "Usually he spends months preparing a conduit. We have less time than I thought." "Preparing for what? What is a conduit? What does he want from me?" Sophia took a long sip of her drink before answering. "Sullivan Thorne was my great-great-grandfather. In 1889, he discovered an ancient Chinese ritual designed to bind a soul to its body after death. The Emperor Qin had it created, believing it would grant him immortality. It doesn't not true immortality, but it does prevent the soul from moving on. So Sullivan is, what, a ghost possessing his own corpse. More complex than that. The ritual keeps his consciousness intact, but it requires periodic renewal. Every 30 years a new binding must occur, and every 100 years a transfer to a new vessel. "A new body," I said, the implication sinking in. Sophia nodded. "The original body deteriorates even with the best preservation techniques. Sullivan needs a fresh vessel and a conduit to facilitate the transfer. And that's me, the conduit." "That's what he's chosen you to be, yes. The conduit opens the gateway between vessels. It requires someone with special perception, someone who can see beyond the veil between worlds." I set my untouched drink down. "And what happens to the conduit during this ritual?" Sophia hesitated, averting her eyes. "The process can be taxing. Not everyone survives it." "So I'm supposed to risk my life for some undead antiquarian's body-swapping ceremony? No thanks." "It's not that simple," Sophia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Sullivan doesn't ask. He takes. If you refuse the role of conduit, he'll find another use for you." "What other use?" Her eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of pity and fear. "The vessel." The room suddenly felt colder. "He wants to take over my body. It would be ideal from his perspective. Young, healthy, already sensitive to the other side." She leaned forward. "That's why I contacted you, Miguel. I want to help you. I want to stop this cycle." "Why would you betray your own family?" "Because I'm next," she said simply. "After Sullivan transfers to a new vessel, he'll need a new caretaker family. The Thorns have served their purpose. We'll be discarded." The way she said discarded sent a chill down my spine. "So what's your plan?" I asked. "There's a counter-ritual," Sophia explained. "A way to unbind Sullivan's soul from the physical realm to let him finally pass on. But I can't perform it alone. I need someone with your abilities. And I should trust you because right now I'm your only ally against Sullivan." She reached across and touched my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "We don't have much time. The transfer ritual is scheduled for the full moon 2 weeks from now. Sullivan is growing suspicious of me already." As if on cue, the lights in the study flickered. The temperature dropped further, my breath fogging in the sudden cold. "He's listening," Sophia whispered, eyes wide with fear. "He's always listening." The crystal decanter on the side table shattered, sending glass and liquid spraying across the room. The photographs on the walls began to rattle in their frames. "We need to leave," Sophia said, grabbing my arm. "Now!" As we stood, a voice filled the room, the same cultured elderly voice I'd heard in my apartment, but louder, now angrier. "Betrayal has consequences, Sophia, as your driver friend is about to learn." The study door slammed shut. On the wall opposite, a large mirror cracked from corner to corner. In its fractured reflection, I saw not Sophia and myself, but Sullivan standing directly behind me, his waxy hands reaching for my throat. I spun around. Nothing there but the cold pressure of fingers against my neck was unmistakable. "The passenger decides the destination, Miguel," Sullivan's voice whispered directly into my ear. "And I've decided where we're going." The pressure increased. I couldn't breathe. Spots danced before my eyes as I clawed at invisible hands. Sophia was shouting something, fumbling in a desk drawer. She pulled out what looked like an old parchment similar to the one Sullivan had sent me. "Stop her," Sullivan's voice commanded, and suddenly my body was no longer my own. My hands fell away from my throat and instead lurched towards Sophia, trying to grab the parchment from her. "Fight it, Miguel," she cried, backing away. "He doesn't fully control you yet." But my body continued advancing, my movements jerky and puppet-like. I watched in horror as my own hands reached for Sophia's throat. With a desperate lunge, she slapped something against my chest, a small cloth bag that burned like fire where it touched me. Instantly, the pressure on my throat vanished, and control of my limbs returned. "Protection charm?" Sophia gasped, clutching the parchment to her chest. "Temporary. We need to go before—" The study door burst open. Thomas Thorne stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his face contorted with rage. "What have you done, Sophia?" he demanded, eyes darting between us. "You know the rules. No outsiders before the ritual." "The rules are killing us, Thomas," Sophia replied, moving slightly in front of me. "How many more family members need to disappear for Sullivan's appetites?" Thomas took a step into the room, fists clenched. "Sullivan protects our family. Provides for us. Without him we'd be free," Sophia cut in. "Free to live our own lives, not bound to a corpse's whims." Thomas's expression hardened. "I can't let you interfere with the transfer, sister. Sullivan has chosen his conduit and his vessel. The ritual will proceed as planned." "The vessel?" I said, suddenly understanding. "You don't mean me. Who is it who is Sullivan planning to possess?" The siblings exchanged a look that confirmed my suspicion. This was worse than I'd imagined. "Tell him, Thomas," Sophia urged. "Tell him who Sullivan really wants." Thomas remained silent, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of guilt. "It's not just any vessel," Sophia told me, her voice breaking. "Sullivan wants someone connected to you, someone whose absence would cause you the most pain." My blood turned to ice as the realization hit me. "Lucia, he wants my wife." Thomas didn't deny it. "The female vessel is preferred, more receptive to the transition." Rage overwhelmed my fear. I lunged at Thomas, but he was prepared. He sidestepped easily and shoved me against the wall, pressing something cold and metallic against my neck. "I truly am sorry, Miguel," he said, his voice almost gentle. "But some traditions must be preserved." Whatever he pressed against my neck emitted a sharp hissing sound. A cold sensation spread through my veins and my limbs grew instantly heavy. As consciousness began to fade, I heard Sophia's voice, urgent and distant. "Find the parchment. It's the key to ending this." Then darkness claimed me, but not before I heard Sullivan's voice one final time, no longer in my head, but emanating from Thomas's mouth. "You're not driving anymore, Miguel. I'm taking you to her now." Consciousness returned in fragments, disjointed sensations that refused to form a coherent whole. Cold stone against my cheek, the smell of damp earth and something chemical, distant dripping water, the taste of copper in my mouth. I tried to move but couldn't. My limbs felt weighted, disconnected from my brain's commands. My eyelids were the only part of me that responded, fluttering open to reveal blurred surroundings bathed in flickering amber light. "He's waking," a voice said nearby Thomas, I realized after a moment. "Too soon," another voice responded, older female, not Sophia. The preparation isn't complete. Give him another dose, Thomas suggested. No, too dangerous. We need his mind intact for the transfer. Transfer. The word pierced through my drug-induced fog, bringing with it a flood of memories. Sullivan. The ritual. Sophia's warning. Lucia. I forced my eyes to focus, fighting against whatever sedative Thomas had administered. Gradually, my surroundings took shape. I was lying on a cold stone floor in what appeared to be a basement or cellar. The walls were rough-hewn stone moisture glistening on their surface. Candles in iron holders provided the only illumination, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Several feet away, Thomas stood talking with an elderly woman I didn't recognize. Not the silver-haired woman from my first visit to the house, but someone older, more frail yet with an air of authority that made Thomas seem subservient in comparison. "Is the vessel prepared?" she asked Thomas. "Eleanor is seeing to it now," Thomas replied. "The purification will be complete before midnight." "And the binding symbols?" "Drawn as instructed. The circle is ready." I tried again to move, managing only to shift slightly. The sound of my body scraping against the stone floor caught their attention. Both turned toward me, Thomas with annoyance, the old woman with clinical detachment. "Ah, our conduit awakens," she said, approaching slowly. She knelt beside me with surprising agility for someone her age. Up close, her face was a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were unnervingly clear, pale blue, almost colorless. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Reyes," she said, studying me as one might examine an unusual insect. "Sullivan hasn't shown such interest in an outsider for decades." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt swollen, uncooperative. Only a groan escaped. "The paralytic will wear off soon," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "Enough for you to participate, but not enough to interfere. For now, rest. Conserve your strength. You'll need it for what's coming." She stood and returned to Thomas, their conversation continuing in hushed tones too low for me to hear. I focused on wiggling my fingers, then my toes. Slowly sensation returned to my extremities. Whatever they had given me was wearing off, but not quickly enough. How long had I been unconscious? Was it already too late for Lucia? I managed to turn my head slightly, taking in more of my surroundings. The basement was larger than I had initially thought, extending into shadows beyond the reach of the candlelight. Stone columns supported a vaulted ceiling. In the center of the room was a large circle inscribed on the floor, not painted but carved directly into the stone, and filled with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Around the circle's edge were symbols similar to those on the parchment Sophia had shown me. Inside the circle stood a stone table or altar, its surface smooth and slightly concave, with channels running to its edges. More disturbing still were the metal restraints attached to its four corners. Fear gave me strength. I forced my uncooperative body to roll onto my side, then pushed up onto one elbow. The movement sent a wave of nausea through me, but I fought it back. "Thomas," the old woman said sharply, noticing my movement. "Secure him, it's almost time." Thomas approached, towering over me. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Miguel," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "What's happening tonight has been in motion for a century. You can't stop it." "Where's Lucia?" I managed to croak, my voice raw and unfamiliar. Thomas's expression softened slightly. "She's being prepared. It's an honor, truly. Sullivan could have chosen anyone, but he chose her. She'll live forever in a way." "As a puppet," I spat. "As Sullivan's skin." Thomas shook his head. "You don't understand the gift being offered. Sullivan doesn't erase the vessel's consciousness. He merges with it, enhances it. Your wife will have access to knowledge and experiences spanning centuries. She doesn't want that. She wants our life together." I struggled to sit up, fully fighting against my still leaden limbs. "Let her go. Take me instead." "It doesn't work that way," Thomas said. "The vessel must be—" "Female," the old woman interjected, approaching us. "The female vessel is more receptive to the transition, particularly one who has known loss. The empty space inside her creates room for Sullivan's essence to take root." the miscarriage. They were talking about Lucia's grief as if it were merely a convenient opening for their parasitic ancestor. "You're monsters," I whispered. "We're survivors," the old woman corrected. "For 5 generations, the Thorne family has prospered under Sullivan's guidance. In exchange, we provide what he needs. It's a symbiotic relationship." "Looks pretty one-sided to me," I said, my strength returning with my anger. "Appearances can be deceiving, Mr. Reyes." She nodded to Thomas. "It's time." Thomas grabbed my arms and hauled me to my feet. My legs buckled, but he held me upright. The old woman approached with something in her hands, a folded garment of some kind. "You must wear this for the ritual," she said, holding up what I now saw was a robe of dark red fabric covered in embroidered symbols similar to those on the floor. "The conduit must be properly attired." "I'm not putting that on," I said, trying to pull away from Thomas. The old woman's thin lips curved in a cold smile. "You misunderstand. This isn't a request." Thomas's grip tightened painfully on my arms. "Please don't resist, Miguel. It will only make things worse." "Worse than watching my wife get possessed by your mummified ancestor. How exactly does it get worse than that?" I struggled harder, finding more strength as the drug continued to wear off. The old woman sighed, then reached into a pocket of her dress and withdrew what looked like a small cloth bag, similar to the protection charm Sophia had used on me. "We had hoped for voluntary participation," she said, "but Sullivan chose you for your strength of will as much as your perception. So be it." She pressed the bag against my forehead. Unlike Sophia's charm, which had burned with purifying fire, this one sent ice through my veins. My body went rigid, then limp. I could still see, still hear, but all control over my muscles vanished. "A binding charm," the old woman explained as Thomas began removing my clothes. "It won't last long, but enough for the preparations." Helpless, I watched as they stripped me and redressed me in the ceremonial robe. The fabric felt strange against my skin, neither fully solid nor liquid, as if woven from congealed blood. The symbols embroidered on it seemed to move slightly when viewed from the corner of my eye, rearranging themselves into new patterns. When they were finished, Thomas dragged me toward the circle. At its edge, the old woman produced a small, ornate knife. Before I could even register what was happening, she sliced my palm open. I felt the pain distantly, as if it were happening to someone else. She collected my blood in a small silver bowl, then used it to trace additional symbols on my forehead, cheeks, and the hollow of my throat. "The conduit must be marked," she intoned, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "The gateway must be opened. The path must be prepared." As she spoke, the binding charm's effect began to fade. Feeling returned to my limbs along with the sharp pain in my cut hand. But something else was happening too. The symbols on my skin burned with cold fire. My vision blurred, then sharpened to preternatural clarity. Sounds became louder, smells more intense. It was as if my senses had been dialed up beyond human levels. "What did you do to me?" I gasped. "We've awakened your ability to see beyond the veil," the old woman said. "Every human has the potential, but few develop it. Sullivan recognized it in you from your first meeting." The air around us seemed to shimmer with currents I'd never noticed before. The shadows in the corners of the room had depth texture, and in those shadows I could see movement. Shapes that weren't quite human, weren't quite anything I could name. "They've always been there," the old woman said, following my gaze. "Most people just can't perceive them. The spaces between worlds are never truly empty." A door opened somewhere above us, and footsteps descended a staircase I hadn't noticed before. 2 women entered the basement. One was Eleanor, the silver-haired woman from my first visit. The other... "Lucia," I called out, lurching forward, only to be restrained by Thomas. My wife walked slowly behind Eleanor, her movements stiff and unnatural. She wore a white gown similar to my red robe, covered in different symbols. Her eyes were unfocused, distant. "What have you done to her?" I demanded, struggling against Thomas's grip. "A mild sedative," Eleanor explained calmly. "For her comfort. The preparation can be disorienting." Lucia's gaze drifted around the room without recognition, eventually settling on me. There was a flicker of awareness in her eyes, quickly followed by confusion, then fear. "Miguel," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "What's happening? Where are we?" "Lucia, listen to me," I said urgently. "These people are dangerous. They're going to—" Thomas's hand clamped over my mouth. "That's enough," he warned. Eleanor led Lucia to the stone altar in the center of the circle. "Lie down, dear," she said soothingly. "Everything will be clear soon." "No!" I bit down hard on Thomas's hand. He yelped and loosened his grip enough for me to break free. I lunged toward the circle, toward Lucia. I never made it. Invisible force slammed into me, lifting me off my feet and hurling me back against the wall. The impact drove the air from my lungs and sent pain lancing through my ribs. I slid to the floor, gasping. "The circle is sealed," the old woman announced. "The ritual has begun." Through watering eyes, I saw Lucia being secured to the altar, leather straps fastening her wrists and ankles. She was struggling now, the fear penetrating her drugged haze. "Miguel, help me!" I tried to stand, but couldn't. The invisible force still pinned me against the wall, crushing my chest. I could barely breathe, let alone move. "Bring him," the old woman commanded. The pressure suddenly released. I collapsed forward onto my hands and knees, sucking in desperate breaths. Before I could recover, Thomas and another man I hadn't noticed before grabbed me by the arms and dragged me to the edge of the circle. "Your position is here, conduit," the old woman said, indicating a smaller circle inscribed within the larger one directly opposite the altar where Lucia lay. "I won't help you," I spat. "Your cooperation is preferable but not required," she replied coldly. "The conduit's role is passive. You are merely the door through which Sullivan will pass." They forced me into the smaller circle, then retreated. I immediately tried to step out, only to find myself unable to move past its edge, not from any physical barrier, but as if my body simply refused to obey the command to cross that line. "The binding is complete," the old woman announced. "Bring the vessel." For a moment I thought she meant Lucia, but Thomas and the other man left the room, returning moments later, carrying something long and wrapped in black cloth. They placed it reverently on a second altar I hadn't noticed before, positioned between Lucia and me. With ceremonial slowness, Eleanor unwrapped the black cloth, revealing the mummified body of Sullivan Thorne. In the enhanced perception granted by their ritual, I could see more than just the preserved corpse. A faint luminescence surrounded it, pulsing like a heartbeat. And within that light, a shape that approximated human form, but was stretched, distorted like a shadow cast by warped glass. "Sullivan's spirit has remained bound to his body for 130 years, the old woman explained, seeing my reaction. "Tonight it will transfer to its new vessel, and you, Mr. Reyes, will provide the pathway." The Thorns took positions around the circle. Thomas, Eleanor, the old woman, and 3 others I didn't recognize. Each held a small bowl similar to the one that had collected my blood. One by one they cut their palms and added their blood to the bowls. "Blood of the keepers," the old woman intoned. "Blood of the lineage. Blood freely given to renew the covenant." They poured their blood into channels cut into the floor. The red liquid flowed along the grooves, tracing the symbols and illuminating them with an unnatural glow. The air in the room grew heavier, charged with static electricity that raised the hair on my arms. "Blood of the conduit," the old woman continued, indicating my still bleeding hand. "Blood of the seer. Blood that bridges worlds." A drop of my blood fell from my fingertips onto the floor. The moment it touched the stone, every symbol in the room, on the floor, on my robe, on Lucia's gown, flared with blinding light. The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me. "And blood of the vessel," the old woman said, approaching Lucia with the ornate knife. "Blood of the receiver. Blood that welcomes transformation." "No!" I shouted, struggling against the invisible boundary of my circle. "Don't touch her!" The old woman ignored me, raising the knife above Lucia's terrified face. Before she could bring it down, the basement door crashed open. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, holding what looked like a flaming torch. "Stop!" Sophia's voice rang out. "This ends now!" The old woman spun toward the interruption, her face contorted with fury. "How dare you interrupt the sacred ritual, child? Your role here is—" "My role," Sophia cut in, descending the stairs, "is to end this cycle of sacrifice. For 130 years, our family has fed Sullivan's hunger for life. No more." She threw the torch, but I now saw it wasn't a torch at all. It was a bundle of herbs and papers bound together and burning with blue-white flame. It landed in the center of the circle, directly on Sullivan's mummified body. The effect was instantaneous. The corpse erupted in flames, but not normal fire. This burned with the same unearthly blue-white light as Sophia's bundle. Sullivan's body writhed on the altar as if alive, twisting in agony. A scream filled the room, not from Lucia, not from any living person present, but from the air itself. The shadowy form I'd seen surrounding Sullivan's body detached, becoming fully visible to everyone. It hovered above the burning corpse, a twisted, elongated human shape with holes where the eyes should be, and a mouth stretched in a silent scream. "What have you done?" the old woman shrieked at Sophia. "You've released him without anchoring." "The transfer can't be completed." "That's the point, grandmother," Sophia replied, pulling something from her pocket, the parchment she'd shown me in the study. "There will be no transfer, not tonight, not ever again." "Seize her," the old woman commanded. Thomas and the other man moved toward Sophia, but froze mid-step as she began reading from the parchment. The words were in Chinese, but even without understanding them, I could feel their power. Each syllable struck the air like a physical blow, making the shadows retreat. Sullivan's spirit thrashed wildly above his burning body, its form fluctuating between human and something else, something with too many limbs, too many angles. "She's performing the unbinding ritual," Eleanor gasped. "Stop her, or we're ruined." The old woman began chanting a counter-ritual, her voice cracking with age and desperation. The symbols on the floor flickered, dimming, then brightening as the two opposing forces battled for dominance. I felt a pulling sensation in my chest, as if something were trying to tear out my heart. My vision doubled the physical basement, overlaid with glimpses of somewhere else, a barren landscape under a sunless sky. The boundary between worlds was thinning, and I was the doorway. "Miguel!" Sophia called out. "I need your help. You're the conduit. You can direct where Sullivan's spirit goes." "How?" I gasped, the pain in my chest intensifying. "The counter-ritual, read it." She tossed the parchment toward me. It landed just outside my circle, frustratingly out of reach. "I can't move," I shouted, straining against the invisible barrier. "You can. The circle only holds you because you believe it does." Sophia continued, chanting louder now, fighting to be heard over the old woman's counter-ritual and Sullivan's unearthly screaming. I focused all my will on my right foot, forcing it toward the edge of the circle. Resistance pushed back, not physical but mental, like trying to move through molasses. I pushed harder, visualizing my foot crossing the line. Inch by excruciating inch, my foot moved forward until, with a sensation like glass shattering, it broke through the barrier. The rest of my body followed, and I collapsed forward, grabbing the parchment. The Chinese characters swam before my eyes, rearranging themselves into English. I began to read my voice, joining Sophia's in the counter-ritual. Sullivan's spirit let out another scream, this one so powerful it shattered every glass object in the room, bottles, lenses, even the watch face on Thomas's wrist. The thorns covered their ears, some dropping to their knees. "You fools!" the old woman shrieked. "Without Sullivan we are nothing. Our fortune, our protection, all of it comes from him." "We'll build our own lives," Sophia shouted back. "Free from his influence, free from the sacrifices." As I continued reading, I became aware of a new presence in the room, or rather multiple presences. Shadowy figures materialized around the circle, indistinct but recognizable as human forms. With my enhanced perception, I could see traces of faces, men and women of different ages, all with the same lost, hollow expression. The previous vessels, Sophia explained, seeing my reaction. Sullivan doesn't just take the body, he traps part of the soul. They've been bound to him all this time. One of the figures approached Lucia, hovering protectively over her. It took me a moment to recognize the face, younger but unmistakably my wife's mother, who had died years before we met. "Help me release them all," Sophia urged, her voice strained with effort. The old woman abandoned her chanting and lunged toward me, the ritual knife raised high. "I won't let you destroy everything we've built." Before she could reach me, one of the shadow figures intercepted her, passing through her body like smoke. The old woman froze mid-stride, her eyes widening in shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that emerged was a thin wisp of darkness, as if something were being extracted from her very core. One by one, the other thorns suffered the same fate, shadow figures passing through them and drawing out tendrils of darkness. Only Sophia remained untouched, continuing her chanting with renewed vigor. Sullivan's spirit was changing now, its form collapsing in on itself, becoming denser, smaller. The blue-white flames consuming his body had spread to the entire circle, but they didn't burn, they cleansed, transforming the blood-drawn symbols into ash. "The final words, Miguel," Sophia called. "You must complete the ritual." I read the last lines of the parchment, my voice stronger, now commanding. As the final syllable left my lips, Sullivan's spirit contracted to a single point of blinding light, then exploded outward in a silent shock wave that knocked everyone to the ground. When my vision cleared, the basement had transformed. The ritual circle was gone, the symbols reduced to smudges of ash. Sullivan's body had been completely consumed, leaving only a pile of fine white powder on the altar. The shadow figures had vanished as well, including Lucia's mother. I scrambled to my feet and rushed to Lucia, still strapped to the stone table. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. "Lucia, can you hear me?" I fumbled with the restraints, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the buckles. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then settling on my face. "Miguel, what? Where are we? What happened?" "It's over," I said, tears of relief stinging my eyes as I freed her wrists. "You're safe now. I'll explain everything later." Across the room, the Thorns were slowly regaining consciousness, looking disoriented and somehow diminished. The old woman remained on the floor, her eyes open but vacant, her breathing labored. "What's happening to them?" I asked Sophia, who was leaning against a wall, exhausted but triumphant. "Sullivan didn't just protect the family, he sustained them," she explained. "Their life force was linked to his. With him gone, that link is broken. They'll survive, but they'll have to live as normal humans now. No more extended lifespans, no more uncanny luck or influence." "And your grandmother?" Sophia's expression hardened. "She was the most deeply connected to Sullivan. She'll feel his loss the most." I helped Lucia sit up. She was confused, frightened, but physically unharmed. "We need to get out of here," I told her. "Can you stand?" She nodded weakly. I wrapped an arm around her waist and helped her off the altar. "Wait," Sophia said, approaching us. "There's something you should know, Miguel. The ritual we performed had a cost." "What kind of cost?" I asked, suddenly wary. "The conduit serves as a gateway between worlds. That gateway doesn't just close on its own." She looked at me with genuine regret. "Part of you will always remain open now. You'll see things others can't, feel things others don't." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you've been changed by this experience. The veil between worlds will always be thinner for you now. Spirits, energies, entities from the other side, they'll be drawn to you." A chill ran through me as I recalled the shadow figures, the glimpses of that other landscape beneath a sunless sky. "You're telling me I'm going to be haunted for the rest of my life?" "Not exactly haunted," Sophia corrected. "More like aware. Most people go through life blind to the realities that exist alongside our own. You no longer have that luxury." "Great," I muttered. "Just great." "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "If there had been any other way—" Thomas groaned, pushing himself up to a sitting position. The other Thorns were stirring as well. Sophia glanced at them nervously. "You should go now," she urged. "They won't harm you. They can't without Sullivan's power, but there will be anger blame. I'll handle them." "Come with us," I offered, surprising myself. Sophia shook her head. "This is my family, despite everything. I need to help them adjust to their new reality. Besides," she added with a grim smile, "someone needs to make sure no one tries to revive the ritual. But go, Miguel. Take care of your wife, and be cautious. Your sensitivity to the other side won't go unnoticed. There are entities out there older and more dangerous than Sullivan." With that ominous warning, she turned away and went to Thomas, helping her brother to his feet. I guided Lucia toward the stairs, but before we could reach them, the old woman's voice stopped us, weak but filled with malice. "This isn't over, Conduit. You've stolen our future, our heritage." She struggled to raise her head, fixing me with a hateful stare. "Sullivan had allies, others who discovered the secrets of binding. They'll find you. They'll use you." "Ignore her," Sophia said. "She's just trying to frighten you." But as we climbed the stairs and emerged from that terrible basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that the old woman's words held truth. The weight of what had happened, what I'd become, settled over me like a shroud. Outside, the night air felt impossibly sweet after the stale atmosphere of the ritual chamber. Lucia leaned heavily against me, still weak from whatever drugs they had given her. "Miguel," she whispered, "what happened down there? Who were those people? What were they going to do to me? It's complicated," I said, flagging down a passing taxi. "I'll explain everything, I promise, but first let's get as far away from here as possible." As the taxi pulled away from the Victorian house, I looked back through the rear window. Sophia stood in the doorway, watching us leave. Behind her, visible only to my newly sensitized perception, a shadow detached from the darkness and slipped into the night, a formless silhouette that moved with unmistakable purpose. And in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that the old woman was right. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The taxi driver glanced at us in the rearview mirror, his eyes lingering a moment too long on my blood-stained hand, and the strange symbols still visible on my skin. "Rough night?" he asked casually. "You have no idea," I replied. "Where to?" I hesitated, suddenly unsure. Where could we go that would be safe from the things I could now perceive? What refuge existed from entities that had been observing humanity since the beginning of time? "Just drive," I said finally, "as far as this fare will take us." As we pulled away from the curb, I could have sworn I saw something in the side mirror, a figure in an old-fashioned three-piece suit standing under a streetlight. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there, just a shadow stretching impossibly long in the wrong direction. The taxi accelerated, carrying us into the night and whatever awaited us at the end of this journey. But one thought kept circling in my mind: the passenger decides the destination, not the driver. And I had a terrible feeling that my passenger hadn't left after all. It had merely changed seats. 6 weeks after the ritual, I sat in Dr. Abramson's office, watching her scribble notes as I recounted my hallucinations. That's what the doctors called them: hallucinations, delusions, manifestations of PTSD. Clinical terms for an experience they couldn't possibly understand. "And you're still seeing these shadows?" Dr. Abramson asked, peering at me over wire-rimmed glasses. "Less frequently," I lied. In truth, I saw them constantly now, flitting at the edges of my vision, lingering in doorways, watching from street corners. But I'd learned to keep that information to myself. "The medication helps." Another lie. The antipsychotics they'd prescribed did nothing except make me sluggish and foggy-headed. I'd stopped taking them after the first week. "That's good progress," she said, making another note. "And the nightmares?" "Still there," I admitted. That much was true. Every night at 3:33 a.m., I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, convinced someone was standing in the corner of our bedroom. Sometimes I saw nothing. Sometimes I saw Sullivan watching with those glass eyes. Sometimes I saw others. Entities without names attracted to the doorway I'd become. "We can adjust your sleep medication," Dr. Abramson suggested. "Perhaps try—" "I'm fine," I interrupted. "Really, everything is getting better." She studied me for a moment, clearly unconvinced. "Miguel, trauma doesn't resolve overnight. What you and Lucia experienced, the home invasion, the assault, these things take time to process." That was the story we told home invasion. Drugged, assaulted, left in an abandoned building where a good Samaritan found us and called 911. It was easier than the truth. "I know," I said, "and I'm processing. I need to get back to normal life." Dr. Abramson sighed, setting down her pen. "Normal might look different now, Miguel. That's okay. You adapt, you build a new normal." If only she knew how different my normal had become. After leaving my session, I walked the 10 blocks home instead of taking the subway. Underground spaces had become problematic. Too many shadows, too many whispers, too many things lurking in peripheral vision. The sensation of being watched intensified in enclosed spaces, especially beneath the earth. Our apartment had changed too. We'd moved from Queens to a smaller place in Astoria, unable to return to our old home with its memories of Sullivan's visitation. The new apartment was bright and modern with large windows and minimal shadows. Lucia had filled it with plants, crystals, and religious icons. From her Catholic upbringing, St. Michael the Archangel featured prominently. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to our door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Lucia was at the kitchen table, laptop open, typing furiously. She'd thrown herself into her freelance writing work since the incident, the routine seemingly therapeutic for her. "Hey," I called, hanging my jacket on the hook by the door. "How's the article coming?" She looked up, her face brightening. "Almost done. Just need to polish the conclusion." She closed the laptop and stood stretching. "How was therapy?" "Fine, same as always." I crossed the room and kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, lavender, and chamomile, an anchor to reality when the other world pressed too close. "Abramson still thinks you're delusional." I smiled slightly. This was why I loved Lucia. She believed me. After that night, after I'd explained everything about Sullivan, the ritual, the thorn, she hadn't dismissed it as trauma-induced fantasy. She'd listened, asked questions, and ultimately accepted that something supernatural had happened to us. She didn't use that exact word, but yes. I moved to the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of water. "How about you, any incidents today?" Lucia's smile faltered. "Just one, this morning after you left, the bathroom mirror." "What happened?" "My reflection blinked when I didn't." She hugged herself, suddenly looking smaller. "It only lasted a second." I crossed back to her, wrapped my arms around her shoulders. "It's okay. Remember what Sophia said, echoes, just echoes of the ritual." After we'd escaped the Thorn House, I'd received a single text from Sophia. "The ritual leaves echoes. They'll fade with time. Stay strong." That had been 6 weeks ago, no further contact. We'd tried researching on our own ancient Chinese binding rituals, Emperor Qin Shi Huangso's Trap Between Worlds, but found little beyond academic articles about traditional beliefs and folklore. Nothing about conduits or gates between realms. Nothing about what happened to someone who'd been marked as I had been. "Have you heard anything from Sophia?" Lucia asked, as if reading my thoughts. I shook my head. "Nothing? And I've driven past the house twice. It's empty. For sale sign out front. Do you think they're gone, all of them?" "I hope so." I released her, moved to the window. The afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across our living room floor. "But I don't think we're that lucky." Lucia came to stand beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "We'll be okay. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." I squeezed her hand, wishing I shared her confidence. That night, after Lucia had fallen asleep, I sat in our living room watching the shadows lengthen as the city lights filtered through our curtains. Sleep had become a luxury I rarely indulged, especially during the darkest hours. A soft rustling drew my attention to the corner of the room. One of the shadows was moving against the natural flow, elongating toward me rather than away. "I know you're there," I said quietly. "You might as well show yourself." The shadow condensed, darkening, taking on a vaguely human shape. Not Sullivan. This was something different, something older. "Conduit," it whispered the word, seeming to bypass my ears and materialize directly in my mind. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice low to avoid waking Lucia. "You opened a door. Doors work in both directions." "The door is closed," I said firmly. "The ritual was broken. Sullivan is gone." A sound like dry leaves, rustling laughter perhaps. Sullivan was a novice, a child playing with forces beyond his comprehension. There are older beings who have waited millennia for a doorway such as you. I felt cold sweat break out on my forehead. I'm not a doorway anymore. That ended with the ritual. Did it? The shadow extended a tendril toward me, stopping just short of touching my chest. Or did you simply exchange one passenger for another? Before I could respond, the shadow dissipated, melting back into the natural darkness of the room. I sat motionless, heart pounding until dawn broke and the shadows retreated. The next morning I left early, telling Lucia I had errands to run before my therapy appointment. Instead, I drove to Brooklyn to the New York Public Library branch where I'd researched Chinese rituals weeks earlier. The same librarian recognized me, smiled as I approached her desk. "Back for more research on Taoist practices." "Something specific this time," I said. "I need information about entities that exist between worlds. Things that might be drawn to openings between realms." Her smile faded, replaced by a thoughtful frown. "That's getting into some obscure territory. May I ask why you're interested?" "Academic curiosity," I lied. "For a novel I'm writing." She seemed unconvinced, but led me to a section of rare books dealing with metaphysical and esoteric subjects. "These aren't available for checkout, but you can study them here." For hours I pored over ancient texts, most in languages I couldn't read, containing illustrations of beings that defied description, entities of shadow and void creatures that existed in the spaces between worlds, predators that fed on human consciousness. One book, a translation of a text supposedly dating back to the Warring States period in China, contained a passage that made my blood run cold. "The conduit once open can never truly close. It becomes a beacon in the darkness, calling to those who hunger for passage into the realm of flesh. The wise sorcerer treats such a gateway with utmost caution, for while it may serve his purposes, it serves equally the purposes of entities beyond mortal comprehension." I closed the book, suddenly nauseated. The librarian approached, concern evident in her expression. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," I managed. "Just hungry. Skip breakfast." She nodded, unconvinced. "These books can be disturbing." The ancients had vivid imaginations. "Imaginations, right." I stood, gathering my notes. "Thank you for your help." Outside, I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel. The shadow's words echoed in my mind. "Did you simply exchange one passenger for another?" I'd spent weeks looking over my shoulder, expecting Sullivan's return, when the real danger was something I'd never considered, that in destroying him I'd signaled my existence to entities far more dangerous. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "Where are you? Appointment in 30 minutes." I started the car, pulled into traffic. As I drove, I caught a glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror, a flicker of something in the back seat. I adjusted the mirror, but saw only empty upholstery. At a stoplight, I heard the soft creaking of leather, as if someone were shifting position behind me. "I know you're there," I said without turning around. "Whoever, whatever you are." No response. Just another creak closer to my ear this time. The light turned green. I accelerated, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I'm not afraid of you." A whisper directly behind me. "You should be." I jerked my head around. The back seat was empty, but the rear-view mirror showed a different reality. In the reflection, an old man in a three-piece suit sat calmly, hands folded in his lap. Not Sullivan, but someone with his same waxy pallor and glass-like eyes. "The passenger decides the destination, Miguel," he said, lips barely moving, "and we have such a journey ahead of us." I swerved, nearly hitting a parked car before straightening the wheel. When I looked in the mirror again, the back seat was empty. My phone rang Lucia's ringtone. I answered on speaker. "Hey, just checking if you're on your way." Her voice came through, tinged with concern. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Almost there." "Good. Oh, by the way, Dr. Abramson's office called. They need to reschedule." "Something came up with your therapist." "What do you mean?" "Apparently Dr. Abramson had some kind of emergency. They've assigned you to someone new, a Dr. Sullivan." My blood turned to ice. "What did you say?" "Your new therapist, Dr. Sullivan. They said he just joined the practice." Through the phone, I heard our doorbell ring. "That's odd," Lucia said. "I'm not expecting anyone. Hold on." "Lucia, wait," I shouted. "Don't open." "Hello," I heard her say distantly, clearly speaking to someone at the door. Then back to me. "It's your new therapist, Miguel. He says he had your home address on file and thought he'd introduce himself since you missed your appointment." In the rear-view mirror, the back seat was no longer empty. The old man smiled at me, revealing teeth too perfect, too white. "I always find my way home, conduit," he whispered. "One passenger or another, the journey continues." "Lucia," I said, pressing the accelerator to the floor, "get out of the apartment." "Now, don't talk to him, don't let him in, just run." But the line had already gone dead. In the mirror, the passenger's smile widened, and his eyes, those glass eyes that reflected everything and revealed nothing, held mine for one terrible moment. "Too late, driver," he said. "The destination awaits."